There are places in the American Southwest where history never seems to settle, where the past clings to the heat, bleeds into the stone, and waits for something, for someone. The Yuma Territorial Prison is one of those places. From the outside, it's a shell. A tourist stop with curated plaques, reenactments, and the occasional school field trip. But once you step through its thick iron gates, past the sun-blistered guard tower and into the remains of the cell blocks, time begins to misbehave. They'll tell you stories about inmates who clawed their own eyes out, about escape attempts that ended in bullets, desert scavengers, or silence, and about a darkness that settled over the prison long before the last cell door ever slammed shut. But there's one story they don't put on the brochures. It's not in the archives. You won't hear it from the reenactors. But ask around long enough, and someone always brings it up, with a glance over their shoulder and a lowered voice, as if the walls themselves are listening. The girl, small, hair to her shoulders, red dress, no shoes, always seen just at the edge of vision, never clearly, always moving, and always watching. They say she drowned in the Colorado River, that she was playing too close to the edge, chasing her doll, one she took everywhere. It had the same red dress, the same black hair, the same stitched eyes, the same smile, and some say it looked too much like her, that it wasn't store-bought, that it wasn't made by any hand known to the living. The night she vanished, the river was calm, flat, like glass, but she screamed, loud enough to send a ranch hand running from a mile off. He said he saw her standing at the waterline one moment and gone the next. Just gone. No splash, no struggle, only ripples widening out like something had been waiting under the surface. Like she'd been pulled. Like she didn't fall, but was taken. The search lasted 3 days. They found her 2 miles downstream, her body snagged against a rock outcrop, limbs twisted, face turned toward the sky, still clutching the doll. But it wasn't soaked, not even damp. And they never found her shoes. The family buried her on a hill above the river. Closed casket. The mother swore the doll blinked during the service. Years passed, the prison shut down. The river changed course, but visitors began reporting strange things inside the prison's museum, where the doll now sat behind glass, catalogued as Exhibit 47B. An anonymous donation. No origin on record. Sometimes it would be facing a different direction. Sometimes its head tilted slightly. Sometimes guests in red clothing would complain of something tugging on them, pinching their skin, whispering right behind their ear. And then the investigator came. One of those modern-day types. Equipment, cameras, a full crew. He'd heard about the rumors, about how the little girl's ghost would react to the color red. He thought it made a good story. So, he pushed it further. He wore red deliberately. A scarf. Bright, unmistakable, a signal. He called it bait. For the first 2 days, nothing happened. They interviewed staff, walked the cell blocks, filmed the museum. And the doll? It stayed behind its glass case, unmoving. But on the 3rd night, just before closing, the others left to grab food. He stayed behind, alone, with one static camera left rolling. That footage was recovered, and I've seen it. It starts with quiet, just the hum of old fluorescent lights, then bare feet, small, fast, echoing on stone. He turns, nothing. The doll case? Unchanged. He walks back into frame, sits, talks to the camera about debunking. Then, movement. Behind him. Fast, like a child ducking out of view. He feels it. Freezes. Grabs the scarf, says, "Did someone just touch me?" And then, the camera goes out. Just cut. For 27 seconds, there's nothing but static. And then the image returns, blurry, disoriented, tilted sideways. He's on the floor, breathing hard, And behind him, against the wall, just barely visible in the frame, something stands, motionless, watching, wearing red. He doesn't see it, but we do. And then it's gone. That was the last night of filming. They wrapped up early. The man didn't sleep at the hotel, didn't check out, just left town. No formal statement, no follow-up. But he mailed the footage, anonymously, to the local heritage board with one note scribbled on the envelope. 2 words, "Not alone." Since then, museum staff have made quiet changes. No more red in the exhibits. Docents instructed not to speak of the girl. The doll remains on display. Same case. But every so often, someone reports that it looks different, that its smile seems wider. And every few years, someone breaks the unspoken rule, wears red, and feels a tug, a pinch, a cold breath that doesn't belong in a desert. But the strangest detail? Those who've seen the girl swear she's not the one moving. They say she's always staring at the doll, like she's watching it, like she wants it back, or maybe, like she's afraid it will leave her behind. If you think this tale was chilling, wait until you hear what's lurking in the next state. Subscribe to MindFuel and fuel your nightmares with every new upload. In the southernmost edge of Arizona, where the land starts to forget its shape and the sun carves shadows into stone, sits a place older than its records admit. The Yuma Territorial Prison, once a symbol of frontier law, now crumbles under the weight of time. And something else. Something that doesn't age. Something that doesn't leave. It's easy to miss the signs if you're not looking. A cracked crucifix in the cemetery just north of the main gate. The lizard tracks that always stop at the edge of the prison wall and never continue on the other side. Or the ravens that gather on the guard tower at dusk, never cawing, never flying off until the final rays vanish behind the Gila Mountains. Tourists still come, of course. History buffs, ghost hunters, families looking for something to do before the sun gets too high. But locals, they don't linger. They smile for the cameras, nod politely during the tours, and always leave before nightfall. Because some stories don't end when the prison closes at 5 o'clock. Our investigator arrived in late June. High heat, slow winds. That kind of dry silence that makes even the air feel stillborn. He wasn't a thrill seeker. Not one of those who come looking for jump scares or cheap YouTube clips. He was meticulous, former historian, specialized in pre-statehood institutions, the kind of man who brought 3 separate notebooks, marked with dates, coordinates, and questions. And 1 red scarf. The same scarf from the footage. He wore it loosely, almost casually, as if daring the stories to acknowledge him. He passed through the Yuma Crossing National Heritage Area just before noon. Took a moment to study the Colorado River from the bluff. Most visitors stop for a photo. He stood still for 15 minutes, watching the way the current moved, like it wasn't rushing, but waiting. Then he turned toward the complex. The first thing you notice about the Yuma Territorial Prison isn't the cells or the towers. It's the silence. Even with tourists nearby, there's a stillness that clings to the stone, as if the walls are holding their breath, as if sound itself doesn't want to go any deeper. He was granted special access, night privileges, off-hours setup. The staff had read his credentials, thought his documentary might boost local tourism. They handed him a single brass key and pointed to a narrow hallway behind the administrative office. That's where the original intake room used to be. He paused there. Said later he felt a tightness in his chest the moment he stepped into that space. Like the air pushed back. The intake room was small. No windows, thick walls, 1 iron hook embedded in the wall with no clear purpose anymore, a single wooden bench, and dust that never seemed to settle. He set up base there, placed the static camera in the northeast corner facing the hallway. EMF meter on the bench, audio recorder in the center. Then he moved room by room, slowly, carefully, cataloging the environment. The cells were colder than expected. No AC, no vents, just thick desert heat, and yet his thermometer dropped 5 degrees inside the first block. Block C, where the most violent inmates had once been kept in near-permanent isolation. He noted scratches in the walls, deep, repetitive, always the same height from the floor, always just under the window slit. One cell had a child's footprint in the dust, but it wasn't alone. It stood next to something longer, not booted, not animal, just an elongated smudge, as if someone or something had been kneeling beside it. He didn't mention this yet, just took photos, logged the timestamp, moved on. In the women's quarters, there was a mural, faded and nearly erased, of a mother holding a baby. No one knows who painted it. It wasn't part of the original prison decor. Staff believe it appeared sometime after the prison closed. But the unsettling part? The baby's face is gone, not painted over, not faded, just absent. A perfect oval of bare stone, like the paint had peeled only in that one place. The scarf began to itch around his neck. He adjusted it, made a note of the strange draft blowing through a corridor with no external opening. And then he entered the museum, the former solitary wing, now retrofitted with placards, photographs, and glass cases. That's where the doll was. Case 47B. No label, no plaque, just a sealed cube of reinforced glass in the far right corner. He hadn't mentioned the doll in his application, hadn't brought it up with staff, but it was the reason he came, because people had seen her here. The little girl, always near that case. He stepped up to it, blinked, and the first thing he noticed? The reflection, not his. The glass showed a child behind him, too low to the ground to be his own form. He turned. Empty room. When he looked back, the doll's head was tilted slightly left. He checked his camera, reviewed the last few frames. In frame 1, the head was straight. In frame 2, still. Frame 3, tilted. No movement, just a jump. He blinked again, stepped back. The scarf grew warm against his throat. He stayed until sundown, moved back through the block, all lights off now, just his flashlight and the faint hum of a battery pack. He heard it once, a soft giggle from the main hallway, the kind that belongs on a playground, the kind that makes sense in daylight, but never after dark. He froze, looked at his watch. 7:06 p.m., marked it. No footsteps followed. But when he returned to the intake room, something was missing. The scarf. It was no longer around his neck. It lay folded neatly on the bench beneath the audio recorder, which had stopped recording at exactly 7:06. The EMF meter? Flashing red, static on the camcorder, just that one segment. He whispered something, too low for the mic to pick up. But later, when the footage was isolated and amplified, the background audio contained one clear phrase, layered just beneath the hiss. Red means she sees you. He picked up the scarf, folded it into his bag, didn't put it back on, and for the rest of the night, he kept glancing behind him, as if waiting, as if whatever had watched him earlier hadn't left. If you think this tale was chilling, wait until you hear what's lurking in the next state. Subscribe to MindFuel and fuel your nightmares with every new upload. Before the prison walls were stone, before the cells held men with trembling hands and hollow eyes, the land beneath the Yuma Territorial Prison belonged to the river, and the river has always taken what it wants. There's a story they tell in whispers, never quite the same, yet always beginning the same way. A little girl, a red dress, a doll that wasn't hers. Some say it happened in the 1870s, before the prison was completed. Others say it was in 1901, long after the first inmates had carved their names into the sandstone. The details shift, like silt beneath moving water, but the shape remains. A girl, no more than 8 or 9, playing by the Colorado River's edge. Her family was part of the settlement, a cluster of tents and adobe near the Yuma crossing. They were traders, or perhaps missionaries. No one remembers for sure. But the girl. Her name was Clara, or possibly Ruth, depending on who you ask. She wore a red dress that her mother had stitched by hand, a deep crimson that stood out even against the dust. The story goes, she wandered too close to the water, chasing something. A doll, some say. A ragged thing with button eyes and one arm torn. Others say she wasn't chasing it. She was following it. The distinction matters, because by the time her father found her bonnet tangled in reeds along the shore, there was no sign of Clara. No footprints, no struggle, just the red dress, caught on a branch and floating slowly downstream. They searched for days, hired scouts, asked local tribes if they'd seen anything, but the river kept its silence, and the land moved on. Until the sightings began. It started with the inmates, hardened men, killers, thieves, soldiers turned outlaw. They weren't the kind to spook easily, but one by one they began requesting transfers out of the southern wing, where the solitary cells were. They claimed they'd seen a child there, always at the edge of vision, always wearing red. One man scratched his eyes bloody trying to get her out of his mind. Another refused to speak for the final month of his life, scrawling only one phrase in charcoal on his cell wall. She's not dead. She's underneath. By 1910, the prison closed. Officially, it was due to overcrowding and deteriorating conditions. But the wardens left something out of the final reports. The bite marks. Dozens of incidents logged over 2 years, small bruises, crescent-shaped indentations on guards and prisoners alike, always in pairs, always near exposed skin, always reported with the same complaint, a sharp pinch, then nothing. Then came the museum era. Tourists began reporting the same thing, a sudden sting on the arm or leg. No one around, no insects, no reason. They laughed it off at first, until someone noticed the pattern. Every person pinched wore red, not a full outfit, sometimes just a stripe, a purse, lipstick, or a scarf. And the doll? It appeared in 1994, found by a janitor during a storage room renovation. He claimed he heard a child humming behind a sealed wooden door. When he pried it open, there was nothing inside but a single antique doll, glass eyes, crimson ribbon, stitched mouth. No record of how it got there. It was added to the museum quietly, with no label, no announcement. Within weeks, employees began quitting. One woman, longtime docent, former schoolteacher, refused to step foot in the solitary wing after closing time. Said she'd seen the doll blink, not shift, not tilt, blink. Another visitor, a retired nurse, took a photograph of the cell block and saw something reflected in the glass. A girl's face pressed against the wall, staring directly at her. No one else saw it. But when the image was posted online, dozens of commenters claimed they'd seen the same girl. Years earlier. Different visits. Same red dress. Same dead stare. Local historians began digging deeper. The prison's early construction maps were brought out of archives, and beneath the foundation, beneath the oldest wing, was something unexpected. A dried-out tributary of the Colorado River. Buried, forgotten, but once connected directly to the river's main vein, right under where the solitary wing now stood. That's when they started calling her the Drowned One. Because if the river took her, maybe it never let go. Maybe her spirit flows beneath the ground, carried in currents no one can measure, slipping up through cracks, through stones, through silence, And maybe the doll? It's not just a relic. Maybe it's her anchor. Or worse, maybe it's watching for her. One local ranger, now retired, recounted an evening tour where a group of students dared each other to touch the glass case containing the doll. One boy, a skeptic, mocked the legend, tapped on the glass 3 times. That night his tent collapsed. No wind, no storm, just sudden failure. When they pulled back the flap, he was curled in the corner, bleeding from what looked like dozens of tiny scratches. Not deep, but fresh. Like 100 small hands had clawed at him. He refused to speak after that, wouldn't even say the word red. Another visitor, a woman from Flagstaff, shared her experience via voicemail to the park office. She had worn red nail polish during her visit, felt a sharp sting on her wrist while looking at the doll, thought nothing of it. 2 days later, she found a child's footprint on her kitchen floor. She lived alone, no guests, no children. She painted over her nails and hasn't worn red since. These aren't isolated stories. They stretch back decades. Each one adds another stitch to the legend. And whether you believe them or not doesn't seem to matter. Because belief isn't required for something to follow you home. You only have to catch its attention, and sometimes that just takes a little red. The air inside the old prison seems to sit still, heavy, dense, the kind of quiet that doesn't feel natural. It isn't silence. It's more like something listening, waiting. The investigator, a man who's walked through abandoned asylums in Connecticut, recorded EVP sessions in the Louisiana bayous, and camped beside ancient burial sites in the Mojave, finds himself pausing at the threshold of the southern cell block. This is where it happens, they told him. The sightings, the pinches, the glimpses. It's always this wing, the solitary wing. With its narrow corridor and iron-barred cells, the floor beneath worn smooth by chain-bound ankles. Every creak of his boot echoes longer than it should, bouncing between the stone walls like a whisper trying to get away. He begins documenting everything: EMF detector, thermal cam, digital audio recorder clipped to his chest, and a compact rig mounted on his shoulder. His scarf, a deep, muted red, tucked beneath his jacket collar, almost forgotten. He moves cell to cell, narrating the layout. Steel bed frames, rusted rings mounted into the walls where chains once held flesh and bone. Each room is barely large enough to lie down in. No windows, just a slit above the door. 20 minutes pass. Nothing but static. And then, it happens. Mid-sentence, he flinches, audibly. The camera catches it, the sharp intake of breath, the sudden snap of his head toward his left arm. He pulls back his sleeve, expecting an insect, a burr, anything. There's nothing, except a fresh mark. 2 tiny reddened arcs near the inside of his elbow, like a pinch. He stares at it for a moment, frozen, not in fear, but in processing. Disbelief is a slow burn, but this is different. It doesn't feel like the ordinary cold spots or faint whispers from past investigations. This was direct, physical. He lifts the audio recorder, rewinds. At the precise moment he reacts, there's a faint clicking sound. 3 soft clicks, like porcelain tapping wood. He doesn't hear it until playback. And then, a breath, not his. A child's exhale. Faint, short, just beneath the ambient static. He checks the thermal camera, frame by frame, and there, in the distant corner of cell 14, barely distinguishable from shadow, is a figure. No features, no face, just a thin outline. And, below it, the hint of color, muted, a blur of red in a place where no red belongs. The investigator doesn't notice at first, not until later, in his motel room, when he scrubs the footage for the 3rd time. There, again. 2 frames, less than half a second. A sliver of a figure peering from the doorway, small, child-sized, standing impossibly still in the corner of a hallway he knows was empty. He pulls the timestamp, cross-references with every other device he has. No motion detected, no temperature change, but the audio tells a different story. At the same moment the figure appears, the room temperature doesn't drop. It rises by exactly 3 degrees for precisely 4 seconds, then falls again, as if something stepped in and then left. His hands tremble as he replays it. Not out of fear, not yet, but something deeper, something like realization. He interviews 2 park employees the next day, discreetly, without mentioning the footage. One of them, a maintenance worker named Elias, mentions something strange. "I don't touch that wing unless it's daylight. I got pinched once, couple years back. I thought I scraped against a nail or something, but there weren't no nails, just the mark, like a kid did it, like fingers." He pauses, then adds, "I was wearing a red flannel. Never wore it again." The other, a seasonal guide, tells him this: "I tell people to keep their red to a minimum, not because I'm superstitious, just I don't want to be the one explaining a bite mark to a 7-year-old. They both mention the same thing, separately. If you see her, don't follow. And if you don't see her, don't look too hard." Later that night, the investigator sets up a static camera in cell 14. He leaves it rolling while he conducts an EVP session 2 floors above. The cell remains still for 43 minutes. Then, the camera begins to glitch. Not a mechanical error, something more organic. The static fractures in soft pulses, almost rhythmic. Every 7th second, the screen dims, and a shape flickers at the edge. The doll. He doesn't even realize it until he slows the footage to 1/8 speed. There, sitting upright in the corner of the cell, same red ribbon, same black eyes, only visible in 2 frames. But here's the part that shouldn't be possible. That doll is locked behind glass, in the museum room, separated from the solitary wing by 3 doors and 50 yards of corridor. He checks the time code again, locks eyes with the playback, and, for the briefest second, he swears she blinks. There's no explanation, no wires, no loop, but the implication settles in like a weight on his chest. This thing, whatever it is, isn't bound by walls or glass or distance. It's tethered to something else, something closer, something watching. And then, at 3:11 a.m., the final footage from cell 14 ends in static. Not a fade, not a glitch, just hard, violent static, as though something pressed its face against the lens. And the last thing captured? A reflection, on the far end of the lens, barely discernible, warped by curvature and glare. But there it is, a girl, a red dress, and what looks like a grin, made not of joy, but of teeth that don't quite belong in a child's mouth. If you think this tale was chilling, wait until you hear what's lurking in the next state. Subscribe to MindFuel and fuel your nightmares with every new upload. History doesn't bury its dead. It catalogs them, quietly, dispassionately, beneath dates and ink. But every once in a while, you find a story the records try to forget. 3 days after the first encounter in cell 14, the investigator shifts focus. What began as a paranormal stakeout becomes something else, something heavier. He stops chasing shadows and starts chasing names. At the Yuma Crossing National Heritage Archives, he begins pulling records, ledgers, census logs, handwritten dispatches from the Territorial Marshal's office. Some documents are in poor condition, others too pristine, as if rewritten. It's not until he reaches a crumbling microfiche cabinet at the far end of the records room that he finds her. Abigail Reyes, age 9, drowned in the Colorado River, June 3, 1883. Her name appears in a faded police blotter, barely legible. The entry is brief, just 6 lines. Subject: Reyes, A. Minor. Presumed accident. Recovered half a mile downstream. No foul play suspected. Possessions: 1 cloth doll, red muslin dress, single shoe. Incident observed by no one. No mention of family, no obituary. But there's something else. A marginal note in smaller handwriting beneath the entry. Warden's daughter, followed by a scribbled line, almost a correction. Warden's niece. The handwriting differs from the rest. Hesitant, added later. And then, one more line. Doll missing. The investigator pushes deeper. At the Colorado River State Historic Park, an assistant historian grants access to the archived editions of the Yuma Sentinel, a territorial paper that ran through the 1800s. The paper is filled with the era's usual drama: floods, cholera outbreaks, territorial disputes. But in the June 8, 1883 issue, 5 days after Abigail's drowning, a small headline appears near the back. Unrest among inmates. Prison quarantine extended. The article is vague. It mentions fits of agitation and episodes of uncontrollable weeping among several long-term prisoners. 2 men reportedly refused to eat for 3 days, claiming the sound of a girl singing kept them awake. In one quote, a guard is recorded saying, "They're scaring themselves with stories, talking about red fabric seen outside their cells, talking to the walls, saying she's walking again." The paper dismisses the incident as superstition, nothing more, but the pattern doesn't stop there. Another entry, dated June 12th, guard resigns following disturbance in solitary wing. The article reads, Charles Withers, employed as senior guard, left post citing interference in the late hours, refused further comment. Solitary wing closed for 3 nights pending inspection. 3 nights. Exactly when the girl would have been buried. And yet, no burial record exists. Only a second, deeply creased clipping, likely overlooked. Riverside Vigil, lantern found along South Bank. No service held. According to the note, a group of prison staff attempted to hold a vigil along the Colorado's South Bank, but were discouraged by an unforeseen disturbance. Words left unexplained. The only other detail is this. Doll not recovered. Dress matched by description from earlier incident. Recovered lantern burned out. The implication is silent, but undeniable. The girl drowned, but the doll didn't. The deeper the investigator digs, the more inconsistencies appear. Prison rosters from June 1883 are missing. 5 pages gone, all marked with a faint red X in the archive catalog. A historian tells him it's likely fire damage from a flood of 1916, but there's no record of that fire damaging any other section. Then comes the biggest revelation of all. In a privately donated diary from a former prison nurse, dated August 1883, there's a passage, just a paragraph, but it confirms what nothing else does. It comes with the sound first. A dragging sound, wet cloth on stone. That's how we know she's near. Men beg to be transferred. One refused to leave his cell, said she stood in the doorway with the doll pressed to her chest. Said her eyes weren't right. Said they kept moving. The next page is missing. The investigator stops reading and sits with it. No words, just the weight of realization. This isn't a story that drifted into legend. It was buried. Actively. The image starts to form. A little girl left unnamed in records, linked by rumor and silence to the prison's most violent outbursts. The red dress wasn't a symbol. It was a warning. And somewhere in the shift from fact to folklore, the doll was left behind. He revisits the museum display inside the prison, where the doll sits behind glass. The curator swears it was discovered decades later, washed ashore beneath a stone culvert during a cleanup project in the 1940s. No one connected it to Abigail. until now. The fabric matches, the red muslin, the black buttons for eyes, the hand-stitched grin. But there's something the curator doesn't advertise. The doll is heavy, heavier than it should be for its size, filled with something dense, not sand, not cotton. The original tag, now faded and cracked, reads only, "Found with chain fragment. Do not touch without gloves." The investigator begins to wonder, what if it wasn't her haunting the prison? What if it was the doll? What if the red dress they keep seeing isn't hers, but its? And what if the thing that's been pinching, watching, moving through walls and corridors untouched by time, never stopped waiting by the river? Some stories die in history books. Others leave footprints that never wash away. If you think this tale was chilling, wait until you hear what's lurking in the next state. Subscribe to MindFuel and fuel your nightmares with every new upload. It was never about the red dress. Not really. The color was a signal, yes, but not a symbol of innocence lost, not the way the legends tell it. Not some poetic reminder of childhood tragedy. The red was practical. The red was binding. And until the investigator stepped through the gates of Yuma Territorial Prison, scarf tied proudly around his throat, no one had dared to test whether it was still watching. But now, the boundaries were thinning. He could feel it. 2 days after confirming Abigail Reyes's identity and uncovering the nurse's missing journal entry, he returns to the storage wing of the prison museum. It's a long, narrow corridor behind the main exhibit halls, off-limits to the public unless accompanied by staff. There, amid old shackles, rusted bed frames, and yellowed logbooks, sits a tall shelf with no label. The curator unlocks it, and there it is. The doll. Not the one in the display case. That's a replica, it turns out. A sanitized version. This one is different. The original was stored years ago after a night watchman reported that its case had been cracked, despite no sign of forced entry. That watchman, the curator mentions offhandedly, quit the following morning. No explanation. Left town. The investigator steps forward. The doll sits inside a clear box, sealed on all sides. It's resting on a burlap cloth, simple, unremarkable. But what's inside is far from ordinary. The body is stuffed fabric, hand-sewn, limbs thin and wiry. The head is slightly oversized, but it's the dress, faded red muslin, tattered at the edges, that draws the eye. One sleeve is missing. The other is stained. The doll's eyes are made of buttons, not matched. One is too large, the other hanging by a thread. And stitched across its mouth is a coarse black thread, pulled tight, like someone tried to keep it from opening. There's no tag, no maker's mark, no date. Only a scrap of parchment tucked into the lining of the storage box, half burned at the corner. Written in what looks like fountain pen. Return to river before solstice. Do not speak to her. Do not listen when she cries. The curator shrugs. Superstitious nonsense, he says. But the investigator says nothing. He's still staring at the doll, because he knows something the curator doesn't. 3 nights ago, he heard crying echo through the prison corridors, and he listened. The next day, a fresh pinch mark had appeared just above his collarbone. The footage still hasn't explained it. And now, standing in front of the original doll, the air feels denser. Not cold, not heavy, just thick, like the moment before a thunderclap. He asks if he can examine it more closely. The curator hesitates, but agrees, on the condition that gloves are worn and the lid stays sealed. But when they reach for the gloves, the lights above flicker, twice. The box vibrates, just slightly, a tremor, barely enough to register, but both men see it. And then, a crack appears in the lower left corner of the box. Not deep, not wide, but fresh. The curator steps back immediately. We're done here. The doll is returned to its shelf and the cabinet is locked. But the investigator isn't done. That night, he reviews the old photographs stored in the museum's online archives. Most show nothing. Sepia-toned stills of the prison yard, the mess hall, cell blocks. But in one, taken on July 3, 1883, a month after Abigail's reported death, he spots it. In the background of a group photo of guards and administrators, tucked in the shadow near the corner of a stone wall, is a child-sized figure, almost entirely obscured. But the outline is unmistakable. A drooping head, unmatched button eyes, a dress torn at the sleeve, and something else. Next to the doll is a blurred shape that looks very much like a human hand. Small, thin, as if reaching for it. Only, there are no children listed in the prison's records that day, and no guards reported any family on site. The caption of the photo reads, July 3rd, Post-Chapel Assembly, following second incident. No explanation of what the incident was. The investigator tries to request more info from the archive, but receives a reply the next morning. Photo pulled from public view. Internal review in progress. They don't say why. He knows why. The doll wasn't handmade by a grieving child. It wasn't left behind by accident. It was placed. Somehow, it became the axis of Abigail's story. Or maybe she was just its carrier. He contacts a local tribal historian, hoping to get an outsider's view. What he hears chills him. The elder listens carefully as the investigator describes the doll, the materials, the color, the eyes. The elder says nothing for a long while. Then, he asks one question. Did it have a chain? The investigator says yes, a rusted one, recovered with the doll but separated during restoration. The elder nods. Then he tells a story. A warning handed down among his people about a keeping doll, a kind of vessel made to trap something that couldn't be buried, something that clings, something that moves through water and carries grief like a scent. He tells of a woman once seen walking into the river at dusk, clutching something red. When they found her, she was smiling, but her eyes were missing, and in her arms, nothing but mud. The investigator hangs up the phone. He doesn't sleep that night, because it's no longer about contact, no longer about being pinched or seen or whispered to. The doll is remembering him, and he doesn't know how many others it's remembered before. But he suspects it never forgets. Not once it finds someone who listens. Not once it finds someone who wears red. There's something about nightfall inside an empty prison that shifts your relationship with sound. What seems silent during the day becomes layered, dense, with tiny fractures of noise. Wind struggling through the old ventilation shafts, distant footsteps that seem like echoes from another time, the soft metallic groans of rusted iron settling deeper into its hinges. But none of these sounds are what keeps the investigator awake. He knows the difference between structure and something else. And tonight, it's different. By 6:42 p.m., the sun dips below the craggy western hills. Shadows stretch long across the yard. The last of the public staff pack up and lock the front office. A quick wave, a friendly good luck. They think he's just another overnight enthusiast, one of those YouTubers desperate for a reaction video. He lets them think that. But the scarf around his neck isn't for theatrics anymore. He's seen what happens when you wear red. And more importantly, he wants it to happen again. The control room is where he sets up. A tight cluster of ancient monitors, updated just enough to be functional. One by one, he activates the night vision cameras he's installed earlier in the week. Cell Block A, Cell Block B, the mess hall, infirmary, the solitary yard, and of course, the storage wing. Each room flickers to life on his screen. Static pulses in brief, harmless bursts. He logs the time, 7:03. p.m. Outside, dusk thickens. The last light slips from the desert sky, and then the first sound. A drag. Not a shuffle, not a step, but a long, deliberate drag, like cloth over stone. It comes from cell block B. He checks the monitor. Nothing. But the sound came through the wall. Not on the feed, through the wall, right behind him. He pauses, doesn't move, waits. Then another sound. Tink. Software hollow, like a chain being tapped against brick. He turns on the audio recorder and speaks into it, voice calm, steady. Possible movement in B-block corridor. Investigating. He takes a flashlight, not the camera just yet, and heads out, boots echoing as he moves through the narrow passageway. The sound of his own breathing is sharp, too loud. At the junction between A and B block, he stops, shines the light. Nothing, but the air is off, the kind of stillness you get in the eye of a storm, tense, waiting. Then, from the far end of the hallway, a flicker of red. Gone. He freezes, and then, pinch, hard, on the back of his left calf. He spins, drops the flashlight. It clatters across the stone floor, casting sharp arcs of light like a strobe. Nothing is behind him. He lifts his pant leg. A mark is forming. Red, slightly raised. 3 small indentations like fingertips. He backs up, breathing hard now, the camera on his chest whirring softly. He doesn't dare check the footage yet. Back in the control room, he logs it. 7:46 p.m. Physical contact confirmed. He replays the hallway camera. There's no figure. But when he pauses at the moment of the pinch, the flashlight catches something in its arc. Something small, fabric, twisting midair, like the corner of a torn sleeve. Red. He enlarges the frame. It vanishes on zoom. He replays it again. Same result. And then, on the feed for the infirmary wing, motion. Just a single frame and only on one monitor. It shows the doll, standing upright, in the middle of the infirmary floor. Then, nothing. The next frame is empty. He switches to the camera in the storage wing. The glass box is intact, but the doll isn't inside. It's not anywhere in the frame. The box sits empty, untouched. No open door, no staff access, no reason for it to be gone. He rewinds 20 minutes, still there. 10 minutes, still there. 5, gone. And then, without warning, the audio feed spikes. A voice, low, whispered. Not from the hallway mic, not from the camera, from inside the control room, right behind the investigator. A child's voice, only 2 words. Why scarf? He spins. Empty, nothing, no movement, no signal interruption, but the recording plays back the voice perfectly. Why scarf? Not accusatory, just curious, innocent, too innocent. He clutches the edge of the desk, staring at the door. It's still shut. He's alone. He checks the hallway again, and that's when he sees it. The footprints. Small, bare. They appear in real time on the dust-layered floor outside cell block A. Left, right, left again. No body, no legs, just the indentations, moving toward the main yard. The air temperature drops suddenly, sharp enough to register on the FLIR sensor. A red heat signature passes the cell block wall and stops, dead center on his location. Then the sensor dies. No power loss, just off. Everything goes silent. Not the kind of silence that fills a space, but the kind that presses in. No static, no airflow. Even the power hum of the monitors is gone. He breathes out and hears something breathing back. Close. He doesn't move. He doesn't speak. But something touches his shoulder. Cold, small, and then, faintly, he hears the sound again. Dragging cloth. Only this time, it's behind the door. He walks to it slowly, every instinct screaming not to. He places a hand on the knob. Pauses. Opens. Nothing. Just the hallway. But the red scarf is gone from around his neck. Now it lies on the floor. folded, neat, and damp, with river water. They say silence falls hardest in places that have seen too much noise. As darkness swallowed Yuma Territorial Prison and our investigator lay alone in that cell, it became clear this was never just a haunting. It was a calling. The whisper of the past had turned into a murmur in the walls, a rattle in the chains, a flicker in the lights. We arrived seeking history and found something still alive within it. A spirit not forgotten, but ignored. A doll not discarded, but hidden. And in the heart of night, something watching, waiting for someone to understand. But the shadows here are layered, and what we've seen is only the surface. In Volume 2, we descend deeper into the prison's secrets. The doors that time sealed shut will open. The infamous dark cell, a punishment chamber for the worst of the worst, beckons. And within its pitch, black silence, a voice whispers two chilling words: "Find me." We'll uncover visions from the girl's final day, uncover a long-buried chamber, and retrieve the diary that reveals everything: her name, her sorrow, and why she still clings to this place. But as we search for answers, something searches for us. So if you think this story ends here, you haven't been listening closely. The doll was only the beginning. The veil between the living and the dead is thinner than you think. Subscribe to MindFuel and join us for Volume 2. Arizona, the doll in the red dress, descent into shadows. Because the scariest part of the prison is what it was trying to keep locked in.